So let's talk about 1947. It was the year British India was split apart, creating two brand new nations, India and Pakistan. This wasn't just some neat line on a map. We're talking about an event, the partition, that uprooted over 15 million people. It sparked unbelievable violence and totally redrew the map of South Asia. And you know what? That legacy of division, it's still with us today. To really get a handle on the tragedy of it all, we've got to go back and figure out how it even happened.
Yeah, this story is anything but simple. It's this incredibly complex mix of identity, politics, and ambition that took decades to unfold. So the big question we're tackling in this explainer is, how on earth did one of the world's biggest nations literally split in two?
All right, Section 1, One Land, Two Visions. We're looking at the roots of separate identities in British India. So to get our answer, we've got to rewind the clock way back to the late 1800s. Now at this point, India is under one single British rule, right? But even then, you can see these different ideas starting to bubble up about what an independent future should look like.
And this is where a really crucial idea starts to take hold, championed by figures like Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. The argument was that Hindus and Muslims were basically two completely different nations, each with their own interests. Now this became known as the two-nation theory, and it would change everything. At first, it wasn't really a call to split the country. It was more about identity. The thinking was that the cultural and religious differences were just so deep that they were essentially two nations living in one land. And believe me, this idea was about to become a major political powerhouse. Okay, next up, the seeds of division. This is all about political organization and those growing divides. Because, these weren't just abstract ideas people were debating. Nope, they very quickly turned into real, organized political movements, and each one had its own plan for the future.
So check this out. You can really see two parallel tracks forming here. First, in 1885, you get the Indian National Congress. Its goal, at least at first, was just to get more of a voice for Indians under the British. But then, fast forward about 20 years, to 1906, and the All India Muslim League is created. And its job was very specific, to protect the political rights of Muslims. You can already feel two very different movements taking shape, right?
And this slide really gets to the core of the disagreement. On one side, you have the Indian National Congress. They're pushing for a single, independent India, for everybody, a secular nation where all communities can live together. But then you have the Muslim League. Their goal started as protecting Muslim interests, but it grew into something much bigger. They became more and more worried that in a country with a Hindu majority, their voices wouldn't be heard. And that worry, it eventually turned into a powerful demand for a totally separate homeland.
All right, Section 3, a war's unexpected consequence. We're going to see how World War II basically hit the fast-forward button on independence. So this massive global war comes along, and it just completely drains the British Empire. We're talking financially, militarily. They were exhausted. Their hold on their colonies was weakening, and back in India, the demands to leave got way louder and way more urgent. So after the war, Britain promised independence, and at this point, it wasn't a question of if India would be independent, it was a question of when. But the huge, explosive question hanging over everything was, what kind of nation would it be? Was it going to be one nation or two? So the British try one last time to keep things together. It's called the 1946 Cabinet Mission Plan. Think of it as their final Hail Mary pass to avoid splitting the country. They proposed this complicated three-tiered system to try and keep India united, but also give different regions a lot of power. But honestly, it was just too little too late. The major political parties just couldn't agree on it. And when that plan failed, well, that was pretty much the nail in the coffin for a united India. And that brings us to the point of no return, the moment all this political disagreement spilled out into widespread violence. I mean, all the talks had failed. The political path was a dead end. And all that tension that had been simmering for years, it was about to explode. Okay, so what happened? Well, the Muslim League called for something they named Direct Action Day on August 16, 1946. The idea was to hold a general strike, have massive demonstrations, and really show the British how serious they were about the demand for Pakistan. It was supposed to be a political statement. But what was intended as a political protest, it just descended into absolute chaos. The violence that broke out, especially in a city like Calcutta, was just unprecedented. We're talking about days of brutal communal violence that left thousands dead. After that, things were just different. The fear and mistrust were so high that any hope of the two sides coming back together was basically gone.
All right, final section, a line on a map. This is about that final, hurried decision. I mean, at this point, things are spiraling into what looks like a full-blown civil war. The British government, seeing all this, decided there was only one thing they could do. And just like that, with violence getting worse by the day, the British government made the call: grant independence and partition the land. It was decided. They even moved up the date they were leaving, which kicked off this mad dash to divide everything: armies, government assets, and, of course, people. The fate of British India was sealed.
So how were they going to create this new nation, Pakistan? Well, the plan was to carve it out of the areas where Muslims were the majority. This included places like Sindh and Balochistan. But here's the massive problem. Two of the biggest provinces, Punjab and Bengal, were a total mix of Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs. There was no easy way to draw a line. Any border was going to slice right through towns, villages, and farms, separating people who had been neighbors for centuries.
And get this, the amount of time they had to do this was just 5 weeks. Can you believe that? 5 weeks. The guy they brought in to draw the border, a British lawyer named Cyril Radcliffe, had never even set foot in India before. And he was given just 5 weeks to draw a line on a map that would determine the future for millions of people.
So that brings us to our final question. What is the legacy of a border drawn in just 5 weeks? Because that line, the Radcliffe line, drawn in such a hurry, kicked off one of the biggest and bloodiest mass migrations in all of human history. It left behind a legacy of conflict that still shapes India and Pakistan today. It just makes you stop and think, doesn't it?